And now for the sponsor perspective portion of our program. Before we get underway, a quick clarification. While this interview is being conducted by me and all these questions are mine, this content should not be considered editorial, but we're still going to have fun. With that, I'm joined by Michael Evans, the director and president of Alibaba Group. Michael, great to be with you. We've had a great discussion today about how the world works, what's happening with businesses. And, I would love to just give you an opportunity to just share with us the frame of what Alibaba does and how it's engaged in these issues.
Well, thanks, Steve. Pleasure to be here today. In a nutshell, Alibaba is one of the largest e-commerce operators in the world. We're based in China. We spend every day connecting millions of merchants and hundreds of millions of consumers. We've built enabling infrastructure in cloud and payments and logistics so we can serve those merchants and customers all over the world. And that helps us fulfill our mission of making it easy to do business anywhere. So think of it as last year, about $1 trillion in sales, 900 million consumers in China and outside of China, and we deliver about 80 million packages a day. So this is a big scale business in China and globally. Our model is very important. It's very different than most e-commerce operators. We're a marketplace, so we're not a retailer. We connect the buyer and the seller and facilitate the purchase. And our mission is to help those merchants grow their business and their connections to consumers. So in the US, our focus is to take great American products and sell them to the Chinese consumer. And that was about a $40 billion business last year. So I think it fits the mission of this conference and this show, because this is our core strategy in the U.S. is to sell those great American products at a time when the U.S. is trying to recover, but at a time when consumer demand, particularly China and internationally, is enormous.
Well, we have talked in the past about where the global middle class is and the global middle class growth. Well, we're gonna have a middle class in the United States, of course, but it is growing elsewhere, and reaching those markets are so important. And you've got one of the most astonishingly fast-growing digital marketplaces in the world, which I know has been, has helped businesses reach consumers. But what about businesses reaching other businesses? The B2B model. Are you engaged in that? What does that side of it look like for larger scale possibilities?
Well, we're very engaged, Steve, in the B2B business. In fact, I think most people forget that Alibaba actually started, when Jack started in 1999, it was a B2B business model. And since then, we've grown to become the largest B2B marketplace platform in the world. We connect to 190 countries. And in particular, the US B2B business is very, very important. I think people sometimes forget that the trade that takes place between businesses, so the B2B business, is about $24 trillion globally. That's 6 times bigger than the B2C business globally. So B2B, very core part of our history, a very important part of our business strategy. And of course, it helps us serve the little guy, the small businesses, which are such a big part of our culture.
We're having this discussion in the middle of a pandemic, a global pandemic. COVID-19 has hit many people and all around the world, but very tough in the United States. How are you interacting with American businesses on their needs in the COVID-19 era?
Well, in the U.S., we have thousands of brands and retailers, the Estee Lauders and the Fords and the Nikes and people like that, which we're helping all the time. But those are big corporations, and so they find it a little bit easier. And many of them, in fact, most of them have been connected to China for a long time. And it's very interesting, Steve, when I talk to the CEOs of these businesses, they all say the same thing today, which is that China has been a hugely important part of their business in 2020, particularly during COVID. But the part of the business in the U.S. that really needs support are for small businesses, because they don't have the digital tool set. They don't have the large armies of people that can go through the process and understanding of what does it mean to connect directly to China on our platforms. So we spend a lot of time with them, and companies, little companies like Allbirds, which is a sustainable
I love
sneaker.
Allbirds.
Well, everybody knows them, but they started to work with us a little less than a year ago, right in the middle of COVID.
Oh.
And so in theory, it should have shut them down. But by using digital tools like live streaming, they were able to connect to the consumer directly, sell their product. And so their business has been doing really well. And or Congressman Larson, when he was talking about Washington State, well, we're still selling cherries from Washington State to the Chinese consumer because they love those cherries. But so there we are helping farmers, and we can get those cherries from Washington State to the table of the Chinese consumer in 48 hours. So the little guys are our focus. They're our heritage. They're our history. They're what we live for every day.
I find the role that you play fascinating. You've got a broad network. The fact that you can get a cherry from a Washington tree to a table in 48 hours, pretty staggering. I'm just interested with the work I'm sure that you've thought about American businesses that you haven't yet done business with, about what some of the shifts in strategy that they might consider. What are the kinds of things that you might advise American business over here, small, large, medium, to begin thinking about? Because we've got a lot of folks listening to this, both policy folks but also business folks. How can they interact with what you bring to the table, and what are some of the blind spots you may see that they might want to remove as they're thinking about interacting with a global market?
Well, I think there are probably three things that spring to mind. The first would be that being digital or having a digital strategy for your business is no longer optional. It's absolutely mandatory, because COVID has shown us many things, but one of the things we've learned rather painfully is that a offline physical store that's closed is very difficult to make your business grow. And by digitizing your offline assets, you can still be operational and still make sales. The purpose of that offline asset may change, but it allows you to stay in business. So a digital strategy, very important. The second is that the tyranny of distance, as I think about it, between the U.S. and any international market, but certainly the U.S. and China, is enormous. And so many brands think, I'm too small, I'm not in the right category, this is too complicated, I don't even understand the exchange rate between China and the U.S., or I couldn't possibly consider how I would get my products from Piqua, Ohio to Beijing or Shanghai or Hangzhou. So I'm not going to try. It's just too difficult and probably too expensive. And the answer to that is that we have a solution for large brands, large retailers, small businesses, farmers. This is the core strategy of Alibaba in the US, is to try and figure out how we can help everybody that wants to approach the Chinese market or the international markets. And the last thing I would say is that many businesses, particularly in the US, have grown up believing that the most important consumer market and a good enough consumer market was the US consumer market, when in fact it's good to have optionality to sell your products to multiple markets around the world. But for a long time, I think small businesses in particular thought, it was the local market that they had to connect to and do well in. Now, even small businesses can conquer the tyranny of distance and basically sell their products anywhere. That's our mission. Make it easy to do business anywhere.
Michael, you and I have hung out before together, and we both have a travel bug. I mean, I'm going kind of crazy because I'm usually on a plane 2-3 times a week. You probably are 5. We're in a COVID era. How are you dealing with COVID? Are you going back to China and the United States somehow in a secret way, or how are you doing your job?
No, this is Steve. It's been a very abrupt change for me. I would typically do 15 to 18 trips to China a year because that's our headquarters, and my responsibility in terms of helping build the international businesses, I need to be in Hangzhou regularly. So I've learned what it means to do everything virtually, and that took a little getting used to, but it seems to be working very well. And quite frankly, we're a technology company, so being virtual is not the biggest challenge. But we're also a company whose culture is all about adapting and embracing change. And so we've done that well, and as part of the execution. I would say the unknown and the intangible benefit was I get to spend a lot more time with my family, which is great.
I've spent some time with Jack Ma, who I now know is engaged in philanthropy, and he's kind of not running things day to day, as I understand it. He's kind of doing his thing. But the guy's a fascinating character, right? He's one of the world's greatest business people. You've spent time with him, and you're a cool guy and everything. But I'm sort of interested in what Jack Ma's secret sauce is, and how whatever that DNA widget that he has is conveyed. So you used to be a Goldman guy. Now you're an Alibaba guy. What did that do to you? What is his start? So I know it wasn't scripted, but I'd really like to hear.
Well, in your lifetime, you'll run into hundreds of people who claim to be visionaries. But in your lifetime, you will probably only get to work for one if you're very, very lucky. So I consider myself to have one of the greatest jobs ever, which is to work for one of the largest and most important technology companies in the world, with the person at the top who is the founder, Jack Ma, having guided it for the first 20 years. So we miss Jack. Jack is officially retired, but his presence is everywhere. And Daniel Zhang, who's now our chairman and CEO, is very different than Jack, but he's leading the company in a direction which is also very creative and very unknown and will, I suspect, be very successful. The secret sauce of Jack is that he's one of the few people who really is a visionary. And he sees things years before other people do. And the big challenge is trying to figure out, how do you actually put that vision, that sort of view of the future, into operation and make it work for your consumers and for your merchants on our platform?
Well,
and that's what makes it so challenging and fun.
Well,
but that's
fascinating.
Jack.
Michael, I hope you'll tell Daniel Zhang that I want to meet him too, maybe in Davos or whenever we can begin meeting again. That would be great. But Michael Evans, thank you so much for supporting today's program and for this very interesting conversation. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Steve.